Hello, listeners and viewers. I'm delighted to have Dr. Jacob Zenn on this week's episode of Conflict and Terrorism Studies with Wisdom. He recently published a book titled Unmasking Boko Haram, Exploring Global Jihad in Nigeria, published by Lynne, Rienner's publishers. Hello, Jacob. It's a great opportunity to talk about your book today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wisdom. I appreciate you hosting this meeting with me about my book, Unmasking Boko Haram, and for organizing this series of discussions in general. I think they're all very informative, and it's a great contribution to those interested in these issues of terrorism and conflict resolution.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go straight to the questions. The first question, we would like to know about the background to this book. Maybe your research question. Tell us about what motivated you to write this book.
Thanks. That's a really important question. I would say on one level, I've been studying Boko Haram since the very first day the insurgency began in July 2009. So I've been tracking this for a very long time. And one approach that I think was slightly different of mine than perhaps others studying the group was that I never really looked at it from a Lagos or a Abuja-centric perspective, although there are important perspectives in those regards. I always looked at it as sort of a transnational Lake Chad region, Borno-centric insurgency. So I wanted to sort of highlight that, although on one level it's a Nigerian issue, it also is somewhat of an extra Nigerian issue, which makes it perhaps a little bit more confounding to solve than other conflicts, such as my Tatsine, which was a little bit more Nigerian, or perhaps even the Niger Delta one. And I also found some sources that, in my view, date the origin of the group to 1994. And I don't think that part of the history had been brought to light sufficiently, especially because the sources about that had only really emerged in 2016 and 2017. So I really wanted to bring those sources and analysis to the table. And in addition, there's been a lot of interest in ISWAP, Islamic State in West Africa province, because of its ties to ISIS and all. So I thought it was worth discussing that group in detail as well.
Great, that's a beautiful background. So exactly what's your research question? You're finding the origin or the trajectory. What was your research question in the book?
Yeah. I would say the main question was, can we do process tracing of this group in a new way that still brings new sources to the table? Because this is a group that is actually studied a lot. There's lots of books on this group, lots of academic articles, lots of think tank reports. And despite that, I still felt that there was a lot of sources that had not been brought to the table. So the main thing I wanted to do is to bring every single data point that I had tracked since 2009, which is thousands, and integrate them into one analysis that finds a common thread. And I think the contribution to the literature there is that now that we have these new data points put on the table and some of my analysis there, people who seek to develop broader theories about the group can now use these new data points and sources in their own theorizing. So my book wasn't so much an attempt to provide a new theory, but let's just get these sources on the table. Let me integrate them in a way that makes sense, and let us move forward and possibly develop new theories based on new evidence presented.
Great, that's very clear. So what would you say was the core findings, or no, the core argument of your book?
I think the most important argument is that the group began in 1994. I think that's the most important contribution to the literature. I think many people might be interested in chapters 9 and chapters 10 because those deal with ISWAP, and that's perhaps more of a cutting issue. But I think when you look at the group's evolution from 1994 until the infamous Panama uprising in 2003, you understand better why this group emerged when it did and how it did, and why it has taken on such an unprecedented evolution ideologically and even operationally. And the main finding within that 1994 to 2003 period is that there was the development of a jihadi network in Nigeria, and that the group that arose at Panama in Yobe State in 2003 was involved local university students, but there were experienced jihadis among them. And once you see that there was these jihadis among that group in 2003, you can sort of understand how Muhammad Yusuf, who was not particularly cosmopolitan, developed this ideology in sync with Al-Qaeda and later ISIS that emerged from 2004 onwards.
Great. Thank you for
and if I could add one more point.
Go on. Yeah.
Yeah, just the one other point is that, people often situate Boko Haram in context of, Izala, the Salafi group, or Maitatsine, who was like a heterodox rebellion in the 1980s. But one thing that Nigerian Islam had not done prior to Boko Haram in 1994, as I date it, was use the concept of jihad to argue that the Nigerian government should be overthrown. Like Maitatsine didn't really use jihad in the sources that I've seen. And although Izala called for establishing Sharia, they really didn't call for overthrowing the government or use jihad in that same way. And so I think Boko Haram really brought that jihad element to the table for the first time. And you can trace that to this evolution from 1994 to 2003. And that's sort of what makes the group ideologically distinct.
Okay, great. Great, thank you very much. Many, unlike most other researchers or studies, which tend to situate the beginning of Boko Haram in 2002, you found that Boko Haram started long before then, and you think it's from your findings, you think it's about 1994. So how did you gather your argument? How did you gather your data? What was your method of gathering data here?
So I think the researchers who say that the group was founded in 2002 are basically correct. And even the group in its own primary sources date their founding to 2002. But just like the United States was founded in 1776, the origin of the United States, you'd have to date 100 or more years earlier. So anything that's founded in a certain date has a deeper origin. So what I'm arguing is 2002 is fine for the founding, but if you want to understand when, why, and how it was founded in 2002, we need to look more towards 1994 as the approximate origin. Now, how did I come up with 1994? No, unfortunately, there's not some great methodology. It's a little bit of serendipity, because I had seen an article a while back from 2004 in Jeune Afrique, which discussed an Algerian armed Islamic group member who came to Nigeria in 1994 and began recruiting. And I kept that in my brain for a while. And then in 2016 and 2017, an AKIM, Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb Sharia official, wrote some memoirs. And he started talking about this GIA member, armed Islamic group member, who came to Nigeria. And he also dated this member's arrival to 1994 in Nigeria. So now I was circulating sources about this individual. Then I began looking at United Nations terrorism reports, Nigerian intelligence reports that colleagues who had contacts to the domestic security service reports from Sokoto had. They gave them to me. They're sort of old now, but it kept on coming up that there was an individual named Hassan Alane, or Sheikh Hassan, from Algeria who arrived in Nigeria in 1994. And he arrived in Nigeria from Niger because Algerian intelligence was tracking him. So Niger sent him in exile. So then he came to Nigeria. And the evidence proved somewhat convincing that certain members of Nigeria's Salafi community welcomed him as an Afghan jihad veteran and as a brother. But with that came this sort of jihadi ideology. And he is tied to Muhammad Ali, who founded the Kanama camp in Yobe State in 2003, which is like Boko Haram's founding, at least through this individual named Yusuf Ahmed, alias Abu Dijana, who ended up being killed in Niger with this GIA member in 2004 after the Kanama uprising. So after I kept on circulating these memoirs, these old news articles, these intelligence reports, these United Nations reports, I began to sort of piece together these guys who brought the jihadi ideology together from 1994 to 2003. And even after I published my book, I came across one golden source, and I intend to publish an academic article about it. And it actually discusses some diaspora Nigerians who were living in Saudi Arabia from 1994 to 2003. And they were involved with this Kanama community, including sending this individual, Ibrahim Haroun, who's discussed in my book, who was a diaspora Nigerian who was sent by Al-Qaeda from Pakistan to Nigeria in August 2003, which is coincidentally only a few months before the Kanama uprising happened. And so I'm not saying that the group in Kanama was, a purely jihadi group full of Al-Qaeda, but I don't think that you can extract that experienced jihadi element from the core leadership of those who were at Kanama. And more recently, Brigaglia and Yochi have, argued that the theory that a fishing dispute caused the Kanama uprising was a way for Nigerian politicians who knew that there was a jihadi element at Kanama to sort of sweep this all under the rug, to make it seem like, oh, it was just a fishing dispute, don't look here. And that actually has to do with some of the cronyism and sort of the dishonesty from the political leadership that you have written about and others have. And so I don't think that they really tackled the group head on in 2003, and they sort of pushed it to the side. And unfortunately, it came back to bite Nigeria a few years later when Muhammad Yusuf rose as the leader.
Great. That's a great analysis. You're taking us back to the background. And what do you think? It may be a little bit difficult to narrow down your book into some sentences of a primary finding, but what would you think in few sentences? What would you want a writer or researcher to reflect or show that is the primary finding of this book?
I would want them to continue the research on 2002 as the founding, but to continue to explore 1994 as the proximate origin. Now, I would also say that when the group was cracked down upon in 2009, and then it rose again in 2010, it's too simple just to say it went underground, and then it came back in 2010, stronger than before. What happened in that period is a little bit of a black hole, but I don't think that you can dismiss, again, the training with H2IM during that time and the funding, at least at a core leadership level. And the primary sources indicate that one of the reasons why the group emerged so strongly in 2010 was actually because of this H2IM training. And I think when you just look at the group on the whole, you cannot pigeon yourself into saying this is an international group or it's a domestic group. I think in some ways the domestic sources are a little bit easier to find because you can speak with Nigerians who are around there. The international related sources tend to be more clandestine, tend to come about through jihadi memoirs or jihadi leaks or jihadi documents. So they're a little bit more abstruse. So I did place an emphasis on finding these jihadi sources that will tend to provide a more international context to the group. And these sources tend to be a little bit more abstruse, but I think you can now use these sources that provide a more international dimension to understanding the group and integrate them with other sources that perhaps shed light on a more local level through local level interviews or sources that are more readily available in a strictly Nigerian context.
Thank you very much, Jacob. The contribution of your work to the understanding of Boko Haram is very clear. So what do you think will be the contribution of this book to understanding global terrorism in general?
Well, I think that we will be able to see actually how things like 9/11 and the war on terror, which did not happen in Nigeria at all, had such global reverberations. In the context of, for example, Nigerian Salafi preachers in that post 9/11 period were quite vehement in pro-Al-Qaeda rhetoric at that time. And they did sort of rescind that rhetoric by 2003 when they saw where Al-Qaeda was growing. And certainly by 2009 when Boko Haram was ready to wage jihad. But also Nigerian Muslims tended to perceive the war on terror as like a global war against Islam, whether true or not. And I think it helps us understand in this interconnected world that we live in, things that happen in one part of the world can just reverberate elsewhere and interconnect with local conditions to create some type of trans-local phenomena. And I think that's what Boko Haram represents. And that's actually what ISWAP represents. Mostly all of its attacks are just in Borno and neighboring parts of Yobe and Adamawa. So like it's local in that way, but yet it's loyal to, Iraqis, Libya. So you really need to understand the way that local and international mix in a jihadi context. But it's not only jihadi groups. Even if you were to go to a market in Lagos, you could say it's very local, but you could also say it's international because you might have textiles from all over the world. So I think, although my book did not necessarily theorize this, it contributes to those who want to theorize the way local and international mix in a jihadi context. But you can maybe even apply that to other contexts as well.
Great. Thank you for that very clear explanation. So what other opportunities do you think are available based on your findings for researchers to develop research on, especially on Boko Haram?
Well, although I think ISWAP and Shekau's faction and Ansuru are the most pressing current issues, for scholars, they're a little bit harder to study because information about what's happening now will slowly trickle several years down the road. So it's very hard to paint a full picture. And I think it's a little bit more viable for scholars to try to paint a picture of what happened 20 years ago, because that's sort of a little bit said and done. It's not a constantly changing situation. So I do think there is still room for scholars to try to go back and, for example, interview Nigerian Salafis about what they recall of the late 1990s, if they're willing to speak. There are members of Nigeria's Boko Haram de-radicalization that maybe have emerged from that program that can talk about Muhammad Yusuf in 2002. So you can actually probably do more scholarly historical research on Boko Haram than you can do scholarly research on, ISWAP post 2015. And so I would say for new scholars, you might try to look back at some of these origin dynamics. Nigeria's diaspora community of the 1990s, Muhammad Yusuf's interaction with Nigerian Salafis in the 2000s. That would sort of be my message. And maybe in 5 years or so, we can come back to revisit what happened in 2015 when Boko Haram pledged to ISIS and how that affected the group. That being said, one contribution that I intended to make from my book and from the accompanying website, unmaskingbokoharam.com, is that at least I put out as many sources as I could possibly find about the 2015 period. So, you know, one day those sources should still be there and we can come back and revisit them. But maybe we need to, you know, provide some time and distance. And I would also say, you know, like you have theorized political cronyism and, you know, cross-border attacks of Boko Haram, and others have made, you know, other theories. And there's certainly not one theory to explain Boko Haram. You probably need, you know, multiple theories. So I hope at least, you know, from the sources I put out there, people can contribute to develop.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Jacob Zenn. You've contributed greatly to the study of Boko Haram and insurgency, especially in the Sahel region. And we really appreciate that. Congratulations on your new book again. And we see you keep writing on other, the counterterrorism, some of your recent publications. We hope we'll be able to discuss one of these new publications, papers soon.
Thank you so much for your scholarship.
Please remember to rate us and send us your comments on your app. Also subscribe and follow us so that you can receive our weekly program straight on your devices. You should also reach out to us if you would like to discuss your recent publication on conflict and terrorism on this program. My name is Wisdom Yekikbolo. See you next week. Bye for now.